I always wanted to be in the Army. Even when I was younger, I was always playing soldier and reading about the Army, studying up on the Army. I knew more about the Army than I did anything else. And I always wanted to be in the infantry. And that was just one of my goals. So that's what I decided I wanted to do. My mother didn't want me to go because I was too young and she was afraid I would get killed. So she wouldn't sign the papers. But I told my dad that that's where I wanted to be, and he told me he would help me. So he knew a colonel that was in the Army, and he spoke with the colonel, and he came back and told me, he says, the colonel will help you get into the Army. So the colonel, knowing all about the Army, decided that he would give me a leg up. So he gave me the information, told me what I needed to do, and I did it. And my dad, knowing that there was no war going on and knowing that I would be drafted anyhow when I got 18, decided that since that's what I wanted, it would be a good idea for my mom to sign the papers. So she signed the papers so I could go into the military.
Well, we were in a new barracks because the camp itself was new. The division I went into was new. Barracks were clean. Let's see what else we have here. Food, good. One thing that I liked really that I never had seen before in Kentucky, that was what I called sugar melons. I don't remember the exact name. They were slick like cantaloupe, but they were a little larger and smooth and real sweet. And I really like those sugar melons. And let's see, physical regimen. Well, following breakfast every morning is out for calisthenics. That means exercises and hikes, marches. We were busy all the time.
We had the old World War II barracks, and you had to get out there and you wax those floors, but the buffers and everything, and it was something else. One thing about it, though, everybody worked together, and they have to fall out for inspection and all that stuff. And that was just, you had to learn to take orders to give orders, in other words, but I enjoyed it. I lost a lot of weight, got but thin down, and I was lean and mean when I came home after basic training.
Well, I enjoyed basic training. A lot of people didn't because it was hard, demanding, and they treated us good. They fed us good. We had good, clean beds to sleep in, but we had to follow all the rules and regulations. But I enjoyed my basic training and my time in boot camp.
Well, there was quite a bit of physical going on when we first went in, when we wasn't used to doing push-ups and stuff, and somebody telling you all the time what to do. I had to really adjust to that. So it really helped me adjust to my civilian life when I come back. That things that you learn to do, obey and listen to somebody else. So I really had to adjust quite a bit when I first went into the service. And I had some good sergeants, and I had some that I didn't think was very good at the time, but I adjusted to all of them.
What my dad told me, if I ever got in the military, pretend like you like everything that the sergeant tells you to do, and you'll be okay. So that's the way I run with it.
Our barracks, they were old, but they were clean because we cleaned them. And the food, you had to get used to the food. I did. And it wasn't really all that bad, but it kept you going. And the physical training was, some of it was intense. Early of a morning, we'd get out and run before breakfast, and it made you feel better, really. It did.
I had some real good instructors. One thing I remember very much. I had a first lieutenant, and he was over the unit we was in, and we always had to go through the gas chamber training, and we were supposed to go in and take the gas mask off and give her rank and serial number, name and serial number there for that. And I was really concerned about going through the gas chamber. So I said something to this lieutenant. I thought maybe I've got to find out for sure if it's safe, you know. So he looked at me and he said, now, the Army is not going to hurt you. They're not going to have you do something that's going to kill you or anything. Everybody else goes through it. So that really made me, it was encouraged me that I could go through that thing, and I did, and no problem whatsoever. But I just remember that lieutenant talking to me that way and being that kind of a person as a lieutenant over an enlisted man. So I thought that's good to know that we have people like that.
Well, there was Sergeant Lunsford. In fact, he was a Kentucky boy, up near Iceland, Kentucky. And he was very good to us. And during basic, he'd come in at 5:30 in the morning and wake us up, turn on the lights. And he'd start back, he had an office at the end of the barracks. He'd start singing, "Way back in the hills." Of course, some of the city boys made fun of him, you know.
Boot camp, I had a TI instructor, and he was a little guy. I was much bigger than he was, but buddy, he was a mean dude. He scared me to death. And we rode the train, got into New York, and got off the train, rode the bus over to the base, got off the bus, and they proceeded to chew us out because we wasn't lining up properly. We was ignorant. And then we got into the barracks, and he fell us all out in the back of the barracks in the bay. And he said immediately, if there's any man here who thinks they can whip me, step forward. We was all scared to death. We wasn't going to open our mouth. I didn't. But anyway, that's the way it got started. He got our bluff real quick. And that was it.
My instructor, that there for a while, I didn't know, but he was from West Virginia too. So, you know, I pretended like I liked everything he said, and we got along real great.
Well, there's some of them that were pretty rough, because when I went into the Army, the instructors were mean. I mean, just plain downright mean. And what I mean by that is they got real loud and did a lot of name calling, and I don't recall ever getting slapped around, because I don't think they could hit you at that time, but I'm sure many of them wanted to, because they were probably used to fellows like me that had a chip on both shoulders and was a little bit mouthy maybe. But some of them, I even had one trying to tell me how to pronounce my last name, because my last name being different than what they were used to. They said, "You don't know how to pronounce your own name." And I said, "Well, I've never been called anything but my name. And so if you change it, that's okay by me. Whatever you want to call me is all right. I'll answer to anything."
They did a fine job. The instructors were good. They were knowledgeable, and they were Korean War veterans, so they knew what's going on. And the rank was hard to get then, because they had the reduction from the service. They had too many people in the service, so rank was hard to make. And they wanted to get people out, and they didn't take kindly if a sergeant gets drunk and disorderly conduct and all that stuff, so they usually bust them back down to a couple ranks.
We had what they called a mad minute, where we fired our weapons for 1 full minute, and it was in the middle of the night, about midnight, and some of our flares set out a fire, and the fire got so bad that we had to stop, because we burned off several acres of just acres and acres of nothing but sagebrush where it caught on fire. Probably one of the bigger fires I'd ever seen in my life.
May of '57, I went into Fort Riley, Kansas. And man, that was in summertime, and it was hot. And boot camp was rough. We had all that, and one time we was out there in the field for training, and we had a grass fire going. And we had to take our ponchos, and sit there and beat the fire. That was a hot job too.
I was told where I would be going and what I would be doing, but that changed because I didn't go to where I thought I was going to go, and I went to a different place, and where I was going was going to basic training. When I went to basic training, we flew from where I was to Fort Riley, Kansas. We landed in Topeka, Kansas, and I had all the orders for 65 people. There were 65 of us, and I was in charge. And I had all the orders, and we reported to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I gave the first sergeant all the orders, and I would stay there for 6 months. I had 8 weeks of basic training, 8 weeks of advanced individual training, and then I had 8 weeks of combat training. So after my 6 months was up, they gave me a 3-day pass, and I was off for 3 days, and then I was transferred to another unit. During this time at the other unit, when I transferred, I went from 6 months of that training into the Rangers and spent 6 months in Ranger training, where I became a Ranger. And after I completed that, then I was given my orders to go to Korea and sent home. When I went home for the leave, it was cold, it was winter, we had 3 foot of snow, and the orders were sent, and they arrived at the post office. I didn't get them, but my mom got them. She gave them to me, and I had to report to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I went to Fort Dix, and I was late. The ship had already sailed without me, and they had told me that I was going to be shipped to Fort Lewis, Washington to go to Korea, but my orders were changed, and I was shipped to Germany instead, and I had to wait at Fort Dix until time to go overseas. I waited there for almost a month until the ship got there, and then I went on the ship and went to Germany.
I went from B-47s to B-52 bombers. Then after Blytheville, I got shipped out to Puerto Rico, Ramey Air Force Base, Puerto Rico. I was in Puerto Rico when President Kennedy got assassinated. So we got alerted that he was assassinated, and we loaded all our B-52s with nuclear bombs, and we flew the Russian border up and down between Turkey and Russia. And we flew all up and down that border, waiting for the word to go in and bomb. But we didn't. That's a good thing.
I was only home one time during my tour of duty, and but they sent us straight from Camp Chaffee and put us on a plane and flew us up to Fort Lewis, Washington. We left Fort Lewis on a boat. Took us 21 days to get to Korea before, and not even able to go home before I did that. So that was kind of disappointing. I was hoping to get to spend some time at home before I went overseas, but with our particular group, they didn't do that. So there I was.
We arrived in France on a ship, of course, and then we got off of the big ship and on the barges and sailed on into the harbor. And there we were met by a group of little kids, little children, and they were wanting chewing gum, chocolate, and something else. They wanted chewing gum, calgamy, they called it for baby, and cigaretting for papa, and chocolate for sister. Chocolate for sister. That was our reception at, I'm trying to think of the place we landed. Marseille, France. Marseille, France.
When I went in, I didn't have any idea where I'd be going to. So I wound up in Korea in about 2 miles of my brother that was over there, and we got to have Thanksgiving dinner together there in Korea, which we enjoyed getting together there. So it's just a wonderful time to see your folks in another country once you get there, you know.
I was over there in 1957 to 1958. That was one tour, and then the second tour I went back over there in 59. No, it was 69 and 70. I've missed the dates on that thing. Now we got 67, 68, and 69, and 70. I came back May of 70 the last time in Vietnam. I was a combat infantry platoon sergeant the first time with the 1st Cav, 5th Battalion, 7th Division. That's Custer's outfit, 7th, from the 1st Cav Division. And the second time I was over there with MACV, Military Advisory Command. And that was down in the Delta area.
I was about middle ways up Quignon area in Valley C. Then I got transferred to the DMZ line up to the border. And that's where I pulled a lot of guard and had to do a lot of maneuvering to check the field out, make sure we was all safe.
We got off the plane and it was hot and muggy, and there was an odor there. It wasn't what I was used to because of the way everything was that they did there in Vietnam. It was something to get used to, the heat and the rain. It came ever so often. The monsoon season sets in, and you just fight that. You fight dust with what we were on, and APCs. We had the Sheridan tanks with us too, and a lot of dust. Unless you're the lead track, you don't get much dust.
We arrived when it was dark, and we couldn't see that much, and the smell was overwhelming. I mean, and the truck driver that drove us from the little airfield to our barracks, he drove as fast as he could. It's because the enemy fire was all around, so he got us there okay.
I was, we flew into Saigon, Tonson Nuke Air Force Base. We got off, got on a troop bus. They had big war cages on the side of it, keep them in bars and everything. You think it was a prison bus. But I asked the guy, what did they do there? He said, well, that's because the VCs comes in there and they have a habit of driving up on a bicycle and throwing a satchel charge, they call it, so on you, in the windows there. So that's the reason why they kept us. And they always had a bad deal. You should be sitting in a coffee shop in Vietnam, and they were setting it to come in and sit down and leave a satchel charge on underneath their table, walk out, and all of a sudden, boom. And you had to watch it. That's one thing about in Vietnam. You didn't have no established front line like in World War II or in Korean War. You had the front line was all around you, 360 degrees.
Well, I was really pretty fresh out of high school. I had graduated from high school, and that fall I got a job with Daniel's apartment store here in London. I was in the retail business there for a while before I went into service, and so I don't know if that helped me any while I was in service or not, but I did get to spend a little time in a little PX in Korea while I was there, one of those little round Quonset huts that where we had this thing, PX for a little while. That was in the last part of my tour there, but I thought, with that extra training I had might have helped me to be in that part of it. I was actually in an artillery unit there, a 969 Field Artillery Battalion. We had about 3 guns, A, B, C, and C batteries, We had the big guns, 155 mounted on tanks, and I was actually a cannoneer. So I just would kind of throw some of that other stuff in there, but it was good to also to be able to get a decent job while I was there also as a gate guard for the compound to let the people in and out of our compound there and keep the hoodlums out from coming in and stealing our stuff. It's pretty bad duty there as far as people just wanting to destroy things. And so I enjoyed a lot of my service.
I was all over Germany most of the time. We were on maneuvers most of the time, and what time I was there, we were either guarding the border, because in those days the border was a communist border. Of course, they had a 50-yard plowed strip between us and the communists on the other side. So I spent most of my time either guarding that border or training for maneuvers. So most of the time was spent in the field. We stayed outside most of the time, and most of the time we were traveling from one place to the other, starting probably in one side of Germany, and you may start today be in one part of Germany, and tomorrow you may be 200 miles away, because we did so much moving around. So we just moved all the time, moving from one place to the other, and different assignments, different posts. I was probably on at least 10 to 15 different posts during the 2 years that I was in Germany, everywhere from Grafenwehr, Weilflecken, Amberg, Nuremberg. I was stationed in Schaffenburg. I even spent some time well, actually, I was stationed pretty close to Gelnhausen, Hanau, and around, most of the time it was in Frankfurt. With some of those cities around those areas, like I said, we would start maybe be close to one city one day, and you may be 200 miles away the next, because we were always maneuvering, going from various places and going through different exercises. During the time I was in Germany, probably went through at least 5 exercises, and most of them were anywhere from 2 to 3 to 5 months long. And a lot of times you would spend 3 to 4 months in the field, you'd never see a building, you're always outside. And it was always cold.
I was a demolition specialist in Germany, and we maintained 2 bridges across the Rhine River for friendly troops, and we kept demolition on those bridges to blow them up after the friendly forces got crossed. And in the latter part of the service over there, we blew up a lot of Hitler's bunkers and buried them for the farmers over there. The German farmers wanted to get those bunkers out of their fields, and so we blew them up with our demolition that we'd taken off the bridges and buried them with the dozers we had. I was in the combat engineer unit, and we had a lot of heavy equipment.
We was the first bomb wing to go into Guam to bomb Vietnam. And after that assignment, I was handpicked to go to Washington, D.C. I didn't know anything about Washington, D.C., didn't know what was there. Andrews Air Force Base. And I asked all the boys around I knew if they knowed anything, they got any bombers up there in Washington, D.C. No. I didn't know what I was getting into. So I went to the first sergeant and I said, Sergeant, how can I get out of this assignment? I don't want to go. I want to stay with the B-52s. I was a crew chief. I was on flying status and making good money. I was single. He said, I'm sorry, Sarge, you can't get out of this assignment. I said, okay. So I went to Washington, D.C. I drove in on base and I asked them where the 89th Squadron was. They said it's down there on that last hangar on the left. So I went down there. I called from the guard shack. I'm reporting in. They said, stand there. They sent a master sergeant out. I was a staff sergeant then. They sent a master sergeant out to clear me in. And I said, now, what in the world am I getting into here? They sent a master sergeant out, because master sergeant don't do things like that in the Air Force. So I found out when we walked in the hangar, there was Air Force One parked right there in the hangar. I said, man, this is what I'm getting into. So I said, I don't know what I'm gonna be doing here, cleaning latrines or what, because they got master sergeants dumping trash cans and all that stuff. But the lowest ranking man there in that squadron was a staff sergeant. And so I spent 8.5 years at Andrews Air Force Base. I met my wife there. I retired from there. And when I got there, Lyndon Johnson was president. When I left there, Richard Nixon was left office, and Gerald Ford was president in 1976. That's my Air Force career.
We have an understanding, you and I. We sit in silence. Nothing needs to be said. I know the weight you carry. You hold your head high, but inside you cry. The life of a soldier is not an easy one. Memories haunt you, but you stand tall and show no fear. The life of a soldier is not an easy one. You hear voices of days past come rushing to your head. You think to yourself, he was a good one. Why is he dead? You wonder if you should have done things differently. No time to think, only react. The life of a soldier is not an easy one. The guilt is too much to bear. Although you were wounded, you question, why him and not me? You can't forget the faces that were there. The life of a soldier is not an easy one. We have an understanding, you and I. You're a soldier for life. And it has not been an easy one.
When you go to war, I was lucky. I went over as an individual. I didn't go over as a group. Like I was with the 34th Armored Group in Fort Irwin, California. I got orders to go to Korea, and they got orders to go to Vietnam. The whole unit went to Vietnam. And when they got over there, they were green, and they lost 2/3 of their outfit. I was lucky, and when I went to Vietnam, I went by myself, and then when I went into a unit, there was a lot of guys there, been there a long time. There's 2 months that you got is most vulnerable in combat. The first 30 days you're in Vietnam, you're not sure yourself, you're green. You can make some stupid mistakes and get yourself killed. The last 30 days, you said to yourself, well, I've survived 11 months over there. Now I know everything. And that's when you get careless and make some stupid mistakes and get yourself killed. So you got to watch. It's the first 2 months of the first month and the last month in Vietnam. You got to be very, very careful. I know last month I was in Vietnam. We got RPG-7 of rockets coming in on our base camp there, and it was hit. Force from you, where my bunk was at. It was a dud. The rocket was dud, and the major said, Sergeant Stokes said, you go on that. That was 5 days before I was supposed to leave Vietnam. He said, you go in Saigon. I don't care what you do while you're in Saigon, but you're getting out of here. So he let me go. I said, well, I didn't argue with you.
I don't remember too much about the exciting good times over there as much as I do some of the bad times, and looking back on them, maybe they weren't so bad, but they were pretty bad at the time. The good memories was the fact that even though they seemed to be real bad at the time, as it turned out, at least I got out alive. There were some times that one would wonder if he was going to, or wonder how he managed to get out without casualties, because we had a lot of those when I went in the Army and when I was in Germany. Times were a lot different then. As a matter of fact, most of the folks, and like I say, I went out when I was 17. The draft would start at 18, and most of the people I was in the military with were drafted. And many of them didn't last very long because a lot of them couldn't handle it. We had fellows that were that committed suicide, would dive off of buildings and find other ways to kill themselves, and some of them just failure to adjust, just couldn't handle it. Even when I was in Germany, we lost people all the time because of they were getting out on dishonorable discharges, Section 8s, any way to avoid, because it was a time when a lot of them didn't want to be where they were.
I was a combat infantry platoon sergeant in D Company, 1st Cav Division. The first night I got up there, I lost a kid in my platoon. He was a Hawaiian boy. That's hard to get used to. When you go in on the front lines like that, and the Murray Mountain cans will come in up Logbird, the Hueys, brings in the supplies, breakfast, and they'll bring in the water for you that day and sea rations for that day. Then they have body bags, and they'll load up your dead when they take out your food and all that stuff that you had that day. And it's hard to go through the line. You're getting ready to eat breakfast, and you see your buddies laying there in the body bags. And you don't have too much of an appetite, but you know you got to eat. And but you got to have your ammunition. They bring in supplies and take out your dead. And that's your life, 7 days a week, 7/24.
But we had a lot of people that whenever we were on field exercises, they would get around the carbon monoxide gas on some of the vehicles, and they would just get so tired that they would lay down next to the engines to get warm, and they would be so tired that they'd go to sleep, and then they would die because they wouldn't wake up, because they would die from poison monoxide gases. So we had some of that going on during those times.
The infantry took a small village, country village, and I was back in the aid station at that time working as a litter barrier. We call them litter barriers, stretcher barriers. And they said, we've got a lieutenant wounded down here in this little town, and we need to take him back to the aid station. So I and there's three more of us, there's four of us to litter. We got into a Jeep. They said, now, when you get down to the first house, there's a sniper. You may need to get out of the Jeep and walk the rest of the way. It's not too far down the street. So we got down to the first house, and rather than to wait to be fired on, we got out of the Jeep and went into the house. And then we decided, well, we better go. So we started out the Jeep, and they started firing at us. We went back into the house, went out the back door, and they started lobbing mortars in on us. So we said, well, the best thing to do is get in that Jeep and go get that lieutenant. And we did, and put him on the Jeep and took him back to the aid station.
I was in a Jeep going to the team headquarters, Team 88. Charlie opened up on us. And I was in the passenger side of the Jeep, I had a driver. And AK-47 shot the radiator off the cap of the Jeep. It just missed me somehow. And the Lord took care of me. He watched over me. I would have been shot all to pieces, but it just knocked up the radiator, and I told my driver, I said, keep on going. That's the steam just flying all over the place. We had to get out of that area. It's something else.
When we got hit pretty bad, I grabbed hold of one of the Jeeps and drove out there one of the the dumps and picked up a couple of guys that was trying to dig a foxhole with their comb. That's, so I grabbed them and pulled them in the Jeep and drove them back to the safety part. And so I got some medals for doing all that. Then when the incoming round came in, and I got a piece of shrapnel hit me in the back. But one of the other guys, he just put a little Band-Aid on it, and we kept on going.
One time I was, company commander, and said, well, I might take reinforced platoon out on an ambush. I'll never forget that. My first ambush, I was in Vietnam. And, well, I didn't get my kids organized and sent out in time to stick a good spot because it was getting dark on us. But when I was going to pick the location where I was going to go, and everybody knows where we was at, Charlie was there. They opened up on us, and I got hit. And I was laid in the rice paddy all night long. Didn't know where I was going to make it or not. And then next morning, the medevac come in, picked me up, and took me back to the camp. And I laid there for, well, 3 days, I think. Well, maybe a week. I was in the field hospital. Had a wound shrapnel wound in the side. And come back. The old man asked me, how you doing? I said, oh, I'm doing, ready to go back to work.
I remember one night I'd have to use the military term, dug in on a hill, and the Germans were on the next hill. And being a medic, the fellows would dig their foxholes. They'd want me to stay with them because I was a medic in case they got hurt, you know. I was their savior, of course, and quote unquote. And I got into a couple of them said, stay with us, Doc. So I got into their slit trench. It wasn't a foxhole, it was a slit trench. And about half of me was exposed above ground. And I covered myself with a blanket and dozed off. And I was awakened all of a sudden by an explosion and things going by my ears, flying by like shrapnel. And I thought, well, the enemy is really after us now. But one of our guys started hollering, medic, medic, medic. So I got out of the foxhole, or out of the slit trench. And he was walking around screaming. And I took him over. I got him. He said, my hand's gone. My hand's gone. So I got him by the arm and led him over to a big rock. Got behind the rock. And the sergeant covered us up with a blanket where the enemy couldn't see the lights, you know. And I saw the shreds hanging down, and so the sergeant had a little candle, and he set it down, and he left. So I put sulfur powder on the wound and bandaged it up, and they brought a Jeep to the foot of the hill, and I went with him back to the aid station.
Excuse me. I was in a foxhole. It gets me every time. Oh. I was pulling guard. Oh, it's so wrong. I'm sorry. I kept this story a secret probably 50 years. And pulling guard, I was in a foxhole. So I raised up out of the foxhole. I wrote a letter to my girlfriend. It just my pencil hit that paper. The pin fell. I bent over and a rifle. I'd have been dead if it wasn't for that. I mean, I've had a lot of nightmares about that. I just try not to talk about it. It's hard to do. So actually, I guess you could say my girlfriend kind of saved my life, and the Lord was watching.
Just actually after the Korean War, it was just, the war was over when I got over there. But the results were unbelievable. The towns were bombed. Wasn't any decent looking towns or left. The little villages we went through, it's really pitiful. People out on the streets. Some of them had like a big old white looking trousers on, and it just looked so unbelievable what you see in those war-torn countries. And we traveled through several little villages going up to where I was. I was about 35 miles north of Seoul, Korea, right up on close to the DMZ, and we'd have a little village right next to our compound, and just grass huts and things like that. And the people would come there wanting food from the PX and things like that. You just felt so handicapped that you couldn't do something for them. It's one of those things that you just felt bad for them. When they had a funeral, sometimes I remember while I was on the gate guard there, somebody had died there in the village right next to us. And they came up the road carrying them on a stretcher, like on the shoulder of their casket. They didn't have vehicles to haul their dead in or things like that. No tractors to plow their fields. They did it by hand, everything they did there. It's just unbelievable what you could see in a war-torn country.
We had one little boy that we called him a gopher, and he would do anything for you, help you any way he could, and he would go around washing our clothes and polishing our shoes, keep us looking good. So, all of us in the barracks really liked him. He'd do anything for a nickel. And so one night we got hit pretty bad, and we found him next day out there in the fields. So he was our friend in the daytime and our enemy at night. And he probably wasn't over 10 years old. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
But there was a time in Germany where we had gone all night on the trains, and I was in charge of an APC, and I had 12 guys with me that were in my squad. And while they unloaded the train and everyone was going where they were going, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I took a tanker bar to take the chalk blocks from underneath the PC so I could drive it off of the flat car. And this was a German train. So during the time, I split the chalk block and smashed my finger against the flat car with the tanker bar. And it smashed my finger really, really bad. And I had to go to the medics. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The medics were there. They bandaged my finger. And then a captain asked me if I could go with him to where he was going, because he knew my MOS and he knew what I could do, and he knew I was a demolitions expert. So he said, "You were in demolitions?" And yes, sir, that's what I do. So I went with him to use C3 and C4 TNT, and we were to blow down trees and blow rails into and that sort of thing. And I was there all day, and the next day, I went back to my unit and found out that most of the unit wasn't there anymore. They had had the accident, and that's when I was told that, and that's when I was missing in action, because when they had the muster alert, they called my name and I wasn't there, but they had found the dog tags of a fellow that had a name, last name same as mine, and they found his dog tags instead of mine, and that's when they thought I had been killed. And I had several pictures of that and the funeral exercises and some of the things that went on there. But that was one of the times when I was in the right place at the right time and had missed out on what happened there. But my first sergeant was killed, and several of my friends were killed, and most of the people that I knew. There were 16 of them killed, 26 of them were wounded. And that was a tragedy that I remember mostly of what happened as far as being in Germany.
I got wounded. That they called a $1 million wound. I was in the bunker, and the platoon leader was with me. And he was in a hammock, had a nylon hammock and stretched across the bunker. And we had sandbags all top of the bunker there. Now, the logbird came in that evening and bringing out the rations, and I was breaking it down, the mail and everything, to the platoons, to the squad. I have the squad leader come up to get that stuff. And all of a sudden, I heard something go boom. And the beam cracked. And I was sitting on a 5-gallon water can, and it called me in, it caved in on me. My head was down on the floor between my ankles. And all that weight was on top of it. It didn't even knock me out. And I was screaming and hollering. It was awful painful that I ever mind back. And I just wheeled myself because the only air I had was between my legs on that water can. And I was running out of air. And eventually, they uncovered me. The platoon pulled us out, me and platoon leader. And it was raining. And they pulled me out, and there was all that sand and dirt and everything else. And that rain coming in about filled my lungs up with air. I said, thank the Lord, but my back was hurting something terrible. And they come find out, my platoon leader was in that hammock. All he got was shinned up on his legs. He went to the field hospital and was back next day to the company. I was medevac to Cunyon. They x-rayed me. My back had a compression fracture of the T12, they call it. And they said, well, you got a $1 million wound. I said, what's that? They said, you're going out of Vietnam. I said, oh, God, what's going to happen to me and my family? I stayed in the Okinawan hospital for almost 4 months with a back problem. They come find out, he says, the doctors there in Okinawa said, you got the same kind of wound that President Ted Kennedy Ted Kennedy had when he had a plane accident, the fracture of the T12. I said, oh, God. And he said, well, it's the only way we can treat that is lay you flat on your back. That's the only way you can do it. They didn't do no surgery or nothing like that. Just laid there on your back. And but the Lord's watched over me. I got to give him credit because my platoon leader, he went back. And the first sergeant wrote me a letter while I was in Okinawa in the hospital and told me that my platoon leader was killed. They had a 160 round mortar round come in that area, and we always slept together. We had a poncho over us. And there's one round come in there and killed my platoon leader. And if I was there, I'd have been killed too. So the Lord had watched over and got me back. And he brought me back in time for my wife to have my daughter. I was there when she had my daughter. The Lord takes care of you in mysterious ways. You wonder how it happens, But he seen that, Ruth said so. She stood on the Bibles in her bedroom saying that Lord, bring him back so he can see the baby born. She told me that later. And I was there. I was there.
When I got transferred to the DMZ line up at the top, when it was time for me to come back to home, when we got to Cameron Bay, I didn't have no records. They considered me dead. So they had to send to the States, get some records on me before I could leave Vietnam. So I had to stay there extra 3 weeks just before I could get out of there. And then they had me pulling guard there too. And I said, my goodness.
I left Okinawa. And I got orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia. I come in on a C-141 cargo plane that had big good pallets up there, and I had tropical khakis on. And the C-141 flew to Anchorage, Alaska. I landed in Anchorage, Alaska in October, and it was cold up there. And I had nothing but khakis on, short sleeve tropical khakis on. I got off that, you had to get off the plane for refueling. That's where we stopped there in Anchorage for refueling. I got off, man, I started shaking, shivering, and got back on. And, crew chief on the C-141 felt sorry for me. He loaned me his flight jacket. Now I've got a good flight jacket and crawled up on top of pallets, went to sleep on a bunch of duffel bags. And I got into Charleston, South Carolina. We landed there, and I got a plane. I forgot what kind of plane it was. Anyway, we flew into Louisville, at the Louisville airport. They met me there. My wife and mother and my brother, I think Bob was with them. When I got off the plane, everybody didn't recognize me because I had lost so much weight in the cake. And Bruce says, "There's Bill." Mom said, "No, that's not Bill." She says, "Oh, it is." They argued about who it was. And finally, it was me. It was a good time, though.
So one day the sergeant came over and he says, "You're going to be discharged today." And I was so surprised I didn't know what to say. So he said, "No, you're out of the Army today." So that day I was taken by train to Bremerhaven, Germany, and we had a colonel there. She was a lady colonel, an elderly lady. And she said, "Don't worry, Sergeant, we haven't had anybody swimming yet." But I was out of the Army that day. And I guess one of the happiest days of my life, of course, we had to get back to New York, and seeing that Statue of Liberty was one of the happiest days. But getting back home with my family and my mom and all the people, they didn't know I was coming. And I just sort of showed up. And my dad was in the yard, and I got out of a taxi. And he said, "Son, don't go inside. It'll kill your mother. She'll have a heart attack for sure." And he left me outside while he went and told my mom that I was home. And that was probably the happiest day of my life.
Well, since I had to stay later, we came back on a civilian airline. And just as soon as the plane left the ground, one of the engines caught on fire. A civilian airline. So we made an emergency landing in Hong Kong, and they took that motor off and put another one on. Then we went to Seattle, Washington. And there I was in a summer outfit, and it was cold there. So they issued uniform almost like what I got on now. I didn't have quite as many medals on it because I wasn't issued those medals till later on. And then I flew to, then they took me to Chicago. Then from Chicago to Charleston, West Virginia. And then there was a man there, his son was going over to Vietnam. So that man offered to take me home, and he asked me questions all the way home about what it was like over there. And I told him the best I could, and he appreciated me and all that. So he took me home, and I walked in the house, and nobody knew I was coming home because I was 3 weeks later. I was supposed to be, and they was real happy to see me.
I could have kissed the ground, really, when I got off that ship and landed in Fort Lewis, Washington. It's just so good to know you were on American soil. And the reason for that is seeing what was, and Korea was torn all to pieces. And it was just meant so much to see American soil. Now, they put us on a plane there that night. We flew all most of the night, I guess, to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and I got to Fort Sheridan, and it was snowing, unbelievable. As the old saying goes, cats and dogs. It was snowing. We had to circle the airport before we could land. I thought, goodness sakes, I come this far going home. What if this thing crashes here before we get home? You have thoughts like that. But we finally got to sit down, and we processed there and Fort Sheridan, and they put us on I guess it was a Greyhound bus, and rode the bus to London, Kentucky. And another little story. I was riding with a friend of mine. He lived in Pineville, but to go back, we went in the Army at the same time. Fort Knox, and he went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I went to these other places, and I lost track of him. We got to Fort Lewis, Washington to go overseas, and there he was. We rode the boat overseas together, got to Korea, and he went one way and I went another. And when I got ready to come home, I got back down to Incheon where we got on the boat, and there he was again. We rode the boat back to the United States and to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, got out of the Army, and he rode to London, Kentucky with me. I got off the bus station and he went on to Pineville, Kentucky. He's from over in Pineville. It's just things like that happen while you're in service. It's amazing. It makes you feel. Now, he calls me every now and then too. He's from up north, high now or somewhere. I've got his number. I carry with me all the time here. Several of those guys' names, and I had a good friend out in Billings, Montana. I've visited him a couple of times. He's been to my house and visited with us. And actually, before I married back home, he came and visited us at the old home place. And so it's just such a closeness there for people.
War is terrible, and I've seen the effects of war on people, and especially my brothers and me and my brother-in-law. He's retired Navy. He almost lost his life in Vietnam, and it affects you. And I don't like it, but it's necessary sometimes to go to war. But I think sometimes we go to war too quick. People don't go to war, governments go to war. And the people I met around the world, they're just like we are. They want to provide a living for their family, security for their family, and be able to have a job, go home, eat supper, go to bed, and raise a family. And that's the main thing that most people want. They don't want to go to war and fight and lose their life. So I believe if the government, all the politicians pull the tour on battlefield, they'd change their minds about going to war quickly.
Don't like war. It's a shame we have wars. We've got young men buried all over this world, you know, because of war. Because somebody wanted power, or they went off their rocker and started wars. Old men start wars and young men die in them. I've always heard that, and that's true.
I don't know, I was always patriotic, and I was proud of my service in the Army, but I wouldn't want my grandkids to go through it. I like to have, we live in peace, but I know it's impossible. There's be wars and rumors of wars, as long as there is people living. But if you're in combat or in service or something like that, take your orders from your superiors. They know better than you do. And when you do go in, listen to them very carefully and pray and keep your house in order when you do go, because there's no atheists in foxholes. People tell you there's not an atheist one in the foxhole. That's the truth. I'll stand by that.
Well, I'd like to say, and I realize now about our future generations, that we have to have military for protection of the United States. And if anyone is willing to do that, I would be proud of them for doing that, and let them realize that we have a need, and if they would, serve their country.
I feel like if they would take me back again, if they needed me, I would go back today. I have no hard feelings of what I saw or seen or anything about any of it. And if they needed me, they would take me, I'd go back today.
It was a good experience for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I can look back now, and I'm thankful, so thankful that I could serve my country. And I'm thankful that my other brothers were able to do that too. We were all supporting our country. I got my grandson I mentioned earlier. He's doing the same thing. And it means something to hold that old flag up and salute that flag. Hear the national anthem. I stand at ball games right now, and when they play the national anthem, and it just makes cold chills run down your spine. So I think we've been over there and supported that flag in time of trouble, you know, and it still stands. Yeah.
I would like to say every parent that has a kid in high school to get involved with the junior ROTC. I feel like, you know, get our young guys interested in military, and that way they can decide on their own if they want to go on to that. You know, they didn't have the junior ROTC when I was young, so I had to learn everything kind of like the hard way. And I feel like that'd be my message to the world right now.
I'd just like to encourage those that go into the service, and not only the ones that go into service, but that lives here in the United States of America, to always support that old U.S. flag. You know, the red stripes and the white stripes, and it represents, to me, blood that was shed on the battlefield for this country. And, you know, Jesus shed his blood that we could have life. And people followed that flag and shed blood that we could have life here on this continent. So I'm thankful for that.
Well, I think that it would help a lot of our young men if they would go ahead and join and go through their training. It would help them in their later life. about some of these things that's going on in our states today. I think that would help a lot of them to go ahead and go into the service and go through the training. But sometimes you don't think that these young people should have to go, but I think it would help a lot of them that would go through the training, and it might straighten them up a little bit.
I think basically, when our future generations, based on everything I've said up to this point, that the one thing that the future generations, I hope, learn is the same thing that I was taught, was to always be positive about everything, always do the best that you can do, always discipline yourself, and if everyone is disciplined and everyone does the right thing, you'll always go in the right direction. If you don't do what you're told to do, and what you're told to do is right, and you do the opposite, there's only one road that you'll go, and it'll be the wrong one. The future generations that I would be discussing, I would hope, would be following in the same footsteps that my mother and dad taught me to follow.
Well, to be loyal to your country when it's right and try to change it when it's wrong.
Well, it made me realize that the world wasn't just Laurel County. The world was a big place, and there's a lot of different people in this world, and I wasn't the only one. Anyway, it made me appreciate Laurel County and Kentucky, and having a family and kinfolks around, and that's the main thing that I learned while I was in the military, that life is not guaranteed, that you better enjoy what you got when you can.